Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, consciousness, and spirituality. Today's episode is with Rachel Lang, who leads individuals, businesses, and groups through transformative processes using astrology, ritual, and the arts. She's also the author of Modern Day Magic, 8 Simple Rules to Realize Your Power and Shape Your Life, and the book As Above, So Below, which is a children's book. She's also the host of The Rachel Lang Show, a weekly podcast. And in addition, she writes columns for the Omega Institute, Conscious Life Magazine, and Club Magic Hour, and contributes to many other publications and leads retreats and teaches classes and workshops on astrology for creatives and so much more. You can find her at rachellangastrologer.com. So welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. It's so great to be here with you. I'm so excited.
Oh, likewise. So to kick it off, Rachel, what are some major themes we should know about when it comes to our astrology charts?
Yes, such a great question. Well, first of all, let me just explain a little bit about how to approach astrology for those who have absolutely no context for it or who are thinking, I don't believe in this, or I don't know anything about astrology. Astrology is really a language of symbols, and it's very similar to people who work with dreams or people who work with tarot cards. Anyone who works, or if you see a therapist, there are so many different ways that we can gain guidance, self-understanding, and map out our life path and map out our sense of where we're going in our lives. And astrology is a great tool to show us where we've been, where we came from, the cultural context within which we were born, how our parents and early caregivers and teachers translated that larger social construct and all that was happening in the world, how they translated it for us, and how we interpret that in our own lives. So we can see a real sense of the past, we can see where we are in the present, and we can get a glimpse of what's coming ahead in the future. So astrology really is a map that shows us our destiny and shows us opportunities and challenges that we face along the way. So within that, there are the astrology map points to what was happening in the heavens at the time of your birth. And many people know their sun signs. That's your sign. But there are so many different aspects of your chart that show us, that give indication and symbolize your relationships, which is your Venus, your moon, which is how you feel your feelings and the innermost part of you, your rising sign, which is how other people experience you, and your it's like your self, your personal expression in the world, and so on. So when I look at a chart, I like to start with looking at those big 3, the sun, the moon, and the rising, because that tells us so much first, just right off the bat.
I love that so much. And I mean, so I want to talk a little bit more. Maybe you could give an example of maybe some signs, or you could even use my chart as an example.
Yeah.
Would love to just kind of ground that into, an example, the sun, the moon, and the rising, and what that means.
Sure. So I would love to talk about your chart because I love your chart. It's so fascinating. So you were born on May 5th. So that gives you a Taurus sun. So the sun was shining in the sign of Taurus at the time of your birth. And the sun represents our creative spark. It's our I am essence. It's what we're here to embody in this lifetime. And so for you, that is sensuality. That is delicious food. That is beauty, flowers, gardens, like anything that gives that I think of Taurus as the sign that relates to what makes us want to live in a body on this beautiful planet. So, and the Taurus sun is also very carefully curated in terms of what you want in your space. There's a real innate sense of harmony. that compels your decisions. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's your spirit self. That is, who you are as your essence. Now, your moon is running really running the scenes, running the show behind the scenes. The moon represents the way we feel our feelings, how comfortable we are with our feelings. It also relates to the subconscious, unconscious needs that we have that are just going to be met. And your moon is in the sign of Aquarius. And so this gives you a really deep need to make a difference and to help other people. And sometimes it's a balancing act of how much are you going to sacrifice yourself to help others, or how much are you going to help others when it's in the flow? Does that make sense to you?
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. Like this humanitarian kind of perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. And Aquarius is visionary. And so it's no surprise that, and Aquarius also relates to technology. So it's like all of these different pieces of your life we can see reflected in just looking at these 3 points in your chart. And your moon is also in a sector of the chart that's related to psychology, the hidden mysteries of the world, financing and debt and taxes, and the way that we partner with others and collaborate with others to bring resources into our lives. And so the moon shines a pretty bright light on all of those things, all of those different aspects of your curiosity. And then we have the rising sign. And a lot of people become more and more like their rising sign as we move forward in our lives. The rising sign, yours is in the sign of Cancer. And so the rising sign actually relates to physical body traits that we have. And I've taught classes on this, just letting people know like different facial features, different like the way that your body is shaped, all of that. We can see a lot of that by looking at your rising. So the Cancer rising is, you have a very approachable presence. And people look at you and they think, this is someone who is really graceful. This is someone who is really nurturing. This is someone who has a soft voice. And so that Cancer rising is kind of like when people first meet you, they think, oh, there's like this maternal, gracious energy that they feel from you.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like that all those things represent like a very accurate picture. And it's so interesting, like the rising and the moon and the sun, and just how there's such a central kind of understanding between the intersection between all three. Like all those things feel very on point, and there's an intersection of that. So, I'm curious because you mentioned, in the house of the moon, for example, that it's in the part of the chart that's related to psychology and mystery and partnering with others. Like, can you tell us a little bit about what the significance of the astrological houses mean in a birth chart? And you can, again, use my chart as an example if you want to pick out maybe one or two of the houses and kind of talk about why it's important to track that.
Great. Yes. So an astrological chart breaks down, it basically divides the sky into 12 different sections. And these 12 different sections each represent a part of your life, an aspect of your life. And it's kind of like if you're driving down, I think about it in the analogy. I like to think about it in the analogy of a neighborhood. There's going to be, the house in the neighborhood where everybody gathers. They've got a great big pool. They always have their garage door open. Then there's going to be the mansion we grew up in there was this abandoned mansion in our neighborhood, and nobody wants to go in there, and it's, potentially haunted. And so our chart represents, all of these aspects of ourselves. If we think about ourselves, like these different aspects of our life, each deserving a placement in a symbolic place in our chart. And the houses go from the first house, which is the house of the body. It's the house of our incarnation. And each one of the houses tells a story of our life from birth to death. And so by the time you get to the 12th house, you're at the house of endings. It's the house that bridges the divide between the visible and invisible. It's the house of letting go. It's the house of transitioning into the spirit realm. And so every one of these houses shows us a different part of our own evolution. The second house is the house of our money, our finances. It's how we spend our money. It's also our values and priorities. And if you look at your chart and you don't have any planets in a house, a lot of people think, I don't have any planets in my money house. That actually can be kind of good. That means there's not a lot of really stressful energy, but there's an influence that we look at the sign. Every house has a sign on it, on the cusp. And that sign tells us a lot about that area of your life. So, for example, your second house, I'm going to pinpoint that. As a Taurus, I'm going to focus on more of the material aspects of your chart. So the second house is ruled by Leo in your chart. And Leo is ruled by the sun, and your sun is in Taurus. So when I look at your second house, I am going to look at what does Leo mean and what does the sun in Taurus mean. And both of those things are going to tell me about the story of your finances and your self-worth. And what I'm going to see in that story is Leo is very expressive. It's very flamboyant. It wants to have beautiful things. It really cares about appearance. It really values the way you show up in the world and how you express your beauty. And so that's one layer of meaning. Then the next layer of meaning that I'm going to call from the symbolism in your chart is the sun in Taurus. And so here I see a real draw to beauty. You're not going to shy away from buying flowers at the store.
Yeah.
Or having plants in your home. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Beauty is a big part of my life. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But it's also in the your sun is also in the 11th house of your social connections, your groups and organizations, your friendships. And so I'm going to see a lot of generosity here in the way that you give and that you do things for other people. And philanthropy is also a piece of that. So I can look at any one point in your chart and unpack so much symbolism about the depth of who you are.
That's beautiful. I'm also curious, and we can move on to so many other questions, but the fifth house is, I remember reading that that's kind of where there's a lot of, let's say there's like multiple things going on in one house. What does that mean if there's a conjunction, for example, or multiple planets?
Yeah, great question. So if you have a number of planets in a house, that area of your life gets a lot of attention, for better or for worse. And so we'll take the fifth house, for example. The fifth house is the house of romance. It's the house of courtship and dating. It's the house of gambling and speculation. It's basically all of anything that we enjoy in life is the fifth house. Children, play, it's creative expression. And when you have planets in a house, that house is getting a lot of light. So you have Jupiter, which is very prosperous. It's lucky, but it can be a lot of energy. And then you have Uranus, which shows that there is a feeling of instability or a feeling of like sudden luck or romances that come and they're really intense and they're really amazing, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, we can't settle this into a relationship, and so Uranus can indicate some lightning bolt attraction and lightning bolt insights and inspiration, but also something that needs to be grounded. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So every house that has a planet in it is getting a bolt of energy, and sometimes there can be too much energy. Sometimes it's like, wow, your 11th house, for example, has a lot of has a lot of energy going into it, and so you might need to balance your social life with your inner life.
Mm,
And and maybe you feel pulled in a lot of different directions, or there's like an almost like a compulsion
yes.
to be involved, that you are motivated by it, but also you might hang up too much of your own identity on who you're with and the groups that you're involved with. And so then
Mm,
we would look at other parts of your chart to see where can we find some balance.
mm. Yeah, that feels right. My social life is definitely like expansive and full for
Uh-huh.
sure. Always been that way. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, enough about me. let's uh, let's move on to I'm curious, like, if people who are listening to this, how can an individual kind of use this knowledge to really understand, their strengths, their weaknesses, perhaps
Mhm.
their purpose? Like, what are some of the things to look for if you're an individual who's like looking at your chart for the first time?
Yeah, such a great question. First of all, there are so many resources available now to construct your birth chart. My website has free birth charts. Astro.com is a good one. There are apps on your phone. And I think one of the best things to do to just get started is just familiarize yourself with the keywords of uh, your signs, of your planets, signs, and houses. And obviously working with a professional astrologer is the best way to understand where to start with your chart, and what to prioritize, because there are so many different avenues that you can explore, and there are so many different aspects of yourself that are worth exploring. But I think just knowing some basic keywords, knowing that the sun is your I am essence, your creative spark, knowing that the moon is the deep inner motives of your subconscious self, and knowing the keywords associated with those signs can give you something to work with to identify why you draw the relationship patterns that you do, or why things are playing out or manifesting in your life.
Yeah, beautiful. So, I'm curious because you blend astrology, ritual, and the arts in your processes. Can you kind of walk us through an example of how these different elements kind of work together to create change?
Beautiful. Yeah. The So first of all, I think we have more information now than ever. I've been doing this work for, about 20 years, but I've been a student of it for about 30 years. And we have more information now than ever about the ways in which our thoughts and our emotions and our actions affect and our realities and our futures. And so we've become uh, more co-creators in our destinies now than just recipients of some sort of fate that we've been assigned. And this is a belief that's emerged and that a lot of people have moved toward, and it's real. Magic is a way of working with the energies, the forces of nature, the forces of our spiritual uh, uh, energies. It's a way of working in participation and cooperation with everything. So, magic and astrology have always gone hand in hand. How many people go out on a full moon and put their crystals on the full moon? How many people set intentions on the new moon and light a candle? Uh, Working even just with the lunation cycle is a way to blend astrology and magic in a way that generates results. Results being there's a shift in consciousness. Something is opening up for you. And I really see magic as being a vehicle for that shift in consciousness.
So I'd love for you to tell our audience, like, what are some of the things to know about rituals for the new moon versus the full moon? And we are in a full moon. We're not going to tell you which one because we're recording this a little bit early. But yeah, I'm curious, like, so today's a full moon. What would you suggest that people do on a full moon? And same with the new moon.
Yeah. So the lunation cycle starts at the new moon, and that's when the moon and the sun come together. And it's a great time for intention setting. It's a powerful, it's the start of a new monthly cycle, but new moons and full moons they have about a 6-month relationship, where by the time the moon is full in that same sign, it's already moving halfway through that. So we have all these little cycles that are taking place simultaneously. So the new moon's a great time for setting intentions. It's a great time for dreaming, for divination, but we can't see things as clearly because it's dark. The sky, there's no light in the sky. Then as the moon is as it's waxing and moving to the first quarter phase, we start to have a little bit more insight. Things in our lives start to show themselves. We start to see where we might have resistance or fear, or where we might need to change our own stories. And there's a buildup of energy that culminates at the full moon. The full moon is a great time for basically any kind of ritual. It's a time when you have the fullness of the light of the sun reflected on the moon. And we actually feel, so it's when the sun and the moon are in opposition, and we actually feel more energized. People don't sleep as well. Animals get activated. So there's a real tension that we feel. And that's because we can see clearly what we can't see at other times in the cycle. And so that's a time when we're more aware of what to let go. So this is a good time to be doing any kind of healing rituals or any kind of manifestation, love rituals, abundance rituals. And then the moon starts to wane. And that's usually a time when we are cutting back, pruning, when we're letting go, when we're detoxing. And then as the moon dims in light, that balsamic moon phase is really the end of a cycle. And people can feel more tired, more stressed, more anxious, because there is a lot of letting go that happens right before that new moon.
So I'm also curious, a couple months ago we had these major eclipses. What does it mean to have an eclipse? And because I really feel quite different after those eclipses. It feels like a lot lighter, and so I'm just curious, like, what does that mean?
Yeah, eclipses are intense. And I will say that eclipses aren't the best time to do any kind of ritual practices. So we want to be very gentle with the energies because they're very intense energies. An eclipse is a full moon or a new moon that lines up with the lunar nodes. And the lunar nodes are these invisible points that relate to the relationship between the moon, the sun, and the earth. And lunar nodes are destiny points. The north node represents where we're moving and what we're here to pay attention to. It's kind of like our own North Star. And the south node represents the talents and skills that we brought into this lifetime. It represents where we're coming from, what's familiar, that comfort zone that can make us feel stuck. And so all eclipses pull us into alignment with our purpose. And if we are resistant, if we are not wanting to move, or we are wanting to stay in a holding pattern, then sometimes there can be a real shakeup in our lives that gives us no choice but to move in a new direction. So eclipses are intense, and we all feel them. And everything that happens during an eclipse cycle, eclipses happen twice a year, and they come in pairs. So there's a lunar eclipse 2 weeks later, there's a solar eclipse, or vice versa. and they're about 6 months apart. And so every time we have an eclipse, we all feel this date with destiny. And so sometimes really karmic, fated, amazing, magical things will happen. And it's like all of a sudden your life changes in an instant. Or sometimes nothing happens on the outside, but everything inside of you shifts, like you're describing, where it just feels like, wow, I'm different and I don't know what that means, but I feel shifted.
Mm. So yeah, it's fascinating. Well, I want to actually double click a little bit on, any other big events like equinox or, oh my gosh, what are the solstice? Like, what are the significance of some of those events? Like, should we be tracking those?
Yeah. Um, there are astrological events that are taking place every day, all day. And I think there are so many resources now to get astrological calendars or, apps that have that kind of information. So equinoxes and solstices are when the sun is at a 0 degree point of a cardinal sign. So Aries, Libra, Capricorn, and Cancer. And 0 degrees of a cardinal sign is what we call a world point. It's a dynamic point. It's an action-packed power point in the chart. And so when the sun reaches those points, we have a burst of energy available to us to make some sort of change, to dedicate ourselves to something, to take some kind of leap of faith, and to take action on something that we might have been had on hold for a while. So those are important points. I think Mercury retrograde is another one that more people are aware of now. And Mercury retrograde is just one of those times of introspection. It's one of those times when some of the big challenges, the ongoing patterns that we have in relationships show up. And it's a time when we are really being asked to communicate, to express ourselves honestly, and also to reflect on what's been happening in the recent past and rethink decisions, or to finalize things, finish business. And that happens about 3 to 4 times a year.
So yeah, I enjoy Mercury retrograde. It's like a nice little pause. Everything's kind of shutting down a bit. So it's
Yeah,
good.
you were born with Mercury retrograde, and a lot of people who are born with Mercury retrograde feel the same way. It's like the rest of the world is operating on your wavelength.
Yeah, it's really funny because I always feel like it's a magical time, and most people complain about it. I'm like, oh, I'm feeling great.
You're absolutely right. It is magical. It's the time when we get to put a pause on all of our external busyness and reprioritize and recalibrate. And I find that I do my best writing when Mercury's retrograde.
Yeah, me too. It seems like things, for at least me, move along during that time. It doesn't feel like there's a break, but usually other people get affected. So it's funny and interesting. I want to talk a little bit about your book, Rachel, because there's so much to say about astrology, but I want to get into your book, which is called Modern Day Magic: 8 Simple Rules to Realize Your Power and Shape Your Life. It's been quite influential for so many people. I'm curious what inspired you to write this book, and what do you hope readers take away from it?
Yeah. The book was really just it just channeled through. What really inspired me was I started writing it when it's funny. We lived in Pasadena here in Southern California near LA, and I would walk by this store, this little metaphysical bookstore, Alexandria 2, or Alexandra 2. And one day I was walking by this bookstore and I heard this like booming voice inside of my mind saying, "There is something in here for you." And I'm used to getting messages. I'm very psychic. I do a lot of mediumship in my practice. And so I've learned not to ignore that voice. And so I walked into the store, and there is this book, this little journal in the very back of the book that I made a beeline for, and it said, "Think in Magic." And so I came out of the store and I went to the coffee shop next door, and I opened it up and I said, I think I'll start a magic journal. And I dated it. And then I started laughing in my mind, and I said, I probably won't finish this because I start journals all the time and I don't finish them. And then, almost as if from some other place inside of my mind, I heard magic rule number 1: trust yourself. And I found myself writing it in a different handwriting, and then, so over the course of a year or so, I would just make a date with my journal and did a lot of the writing in Joshua Tree, where I love being there, just in the quiet. And so over, a year and a half, the book just came into being.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And what are some ways that people have kind of transformed their lives from some of the tools or frameworks from the book?
Yeah, I love talking about this, Yasmin. I teach a magic class a couple times a year. I'm teaching it at the Omega Institute in September this year, and I also teach it regularly virtually. And people have the most mind-blowing experiences. I have a lot of people fall in love. Everybody comes into a magic class working with the materials in the book, but also working in these really beautiful groups. I've had people who've been single for long years and years and years, decades after divorce, taking the class, working with the book, and then meeting their soulmate, meeting their partner. I even had one student who was, came into the class and was really working through some financial things, and they had this like huge deal that came through that made millions. And so there are these kinds of stories, and then there are other stories of people just developing more self-confidence, people writing books, doing their creative work. But magic is a power and a resource that we all have access to. And for so many years, centuries, we have been shut off to it. And now so many people are waking up to it. And one thing I love about this work is just seeing people reconnect with their sacred power, and really feel like they can co-create their life.
Oh, that's amazing. That's beautiful. I love
Mm-hmm.
those case studies too. It's so sweet.
Yeah.
Oh, and you also teach workshops like astrology for creatives, and then you talked about mediumship development. I'm curious, what are sort of the themes or takeaways from this workshop for both the astrology for creatives and psychic mediumship development?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've been doing this, like I said, I've been doing this work for 30 years, and I think I've dipped into just about everything you can dip into in terms of exploring the different ways that we can experience our spiritual gifts. And so I started learning astrology the same time, in conjunction with attending a spiritualist church and learning mediumship. And so I teach that as a 6-week intensive, and then we have ongoing mentorship. And it's a certification course, so I have a lot of students who graduate from that, and they go on to starting practices. And then astrology for creatives is a course I developed with my friend Bonnie Gillespie. And what we identified was there were a lot of people who are entrepreneurs or working working actors, working writers, freelancers, who didn't know that astrology was available to help them structure their businesses and find pathways to success. And so we developed this course with a real specific focus of how can you work with your chart to make the most of your creative potential. And so that's a course that's an ongoing course that we teach.
Wow. That's really cool. I love that. That's so,
Yeah.
I feel like very necessary, how to apply what we can learn from our charts into our day-to-day life. Like, I think that's where a lot of people have that gap. So I'm curious, you also have the Rachel Lang Show, your podcast, which I'm going to be on soon. So very excited
Yes,
about
you
that.
are. You are, yeah.
I'm curious though, Rachel, like what has been one of your most memorable and probably like favorite episodes and why?
Yeah. So I just started the podcast a few months ago, so it's brand new, and I love it. I'm excited to have you on it, um, and I'm learning a lot about how to be a podcast host. But I think one of my favorite episodes so far. It's hard. It's hard to say because I don't want to. I'm a Libra, and I want to give all of the guests that I've had on so far are incredible. Um, and I've learned something different from each one. Um, the one I interviewed an astrologer colleague friend of mine named Caroline Casey, and she is, you know, she hosts the Visionary Activist Show on KPFA. And she's been someone who I've really followed and I've really considered a mentor. And so it was really a kind of a full circle moment for me having her on my show and knowing that listening to her show back in the early 2000s when I was first starting my practice and didn't know if I was going to be successful and didn't really know what what I was getting myself into. I came from a really I worked at a nonprofit. I came from more of a world and a background where astrology wasn't really acceptable. I lived in Nashville at the time. I have, parents who really thought I was going to the dark side, Caroline, listening to her show every week on streaming uh, on the internet really helped to it was like a breadcrumb from the universe saying, keep going, you've got this. And so having her on my show was really a full circle moment where now I am friends with this incredible thinker, visionary, astrologer, activist who opened up the doorway for my career.
Wow.
And so that was really meaningful. And then we got to talk about all kinds of things that are happening, with social current events and political things that are upcoming and the cycles that relate to those. So that was really meaningful.
Wow. And I'm also curious because you span like a number of different careers, like as a city council member in Ojai. And I'm curious, how do you integrate some of your beliefs in this world of spirituality and consciousness into your role in public service?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, my spirituality is always driven by a real deep desire to make a difference and to leave the world in a better place, in a kinder, gentler, more loving, more elevated place than when I was here. And so public service was always something that I knew I wanted to do. I've done a lot of volunteer work. I've been involved in a whole lot of different organizations, and I decided to run for office, local office, because I really saw that I have so much, a different perspective to offer given the work that I do. And I love my community. So why wouldn't I want to give back and to do everything I can for the members of my community and for future generations of our community? So it's, I think my spirituality compels me to get involved, to not just stand on the sidelines and wait for other people to do it, but to actually be an active participant in co-creating the world that we're going to leave to our children and to our grandchildren and their generations.
Wow. And what's next for you? Are you planning to continue this role, or do you have kind of bigger aspirations in the public service world?
I am still navigating that. It's a 4-year term, and I love it. We are doing such incredible. We're doing incredible things for the community. We're doing a lot right now for the unhoused in our community, and I love the way that we are approaching some of the challenges that we face with compassion. We are really doing some kind of cutting edge things with policies here. And so this excites me, and I would love to stay involved. I would love to, become more involved in policy on a state level. I serve on a policy committee right now with the California League of Cities, and I'm enjoying that. So I don't know where it's going to take me, but I know that it really, nothing makes me more passionate and excited than knowing that something I do is going to help people who are housing insecure, people who are food insecure, to have more stability and more access to resources.
That's beautiful, Rachel. I'm so happy that you're doing this work.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's just such a joy to hear that, you're really involved in service.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, looking back on your journey, what sorts of things have surprised you the most?
I think the one thing that surprised me the most is, I thought that when I was first starting my astrology practice, I thought I had to really hide, who I was. So if someone asked me what I did for a living, I would make up some kind of vague answer about doing marketing consulting. And, I kind of thought, well, there's no place in the world for me. I am a queer lesbian woman. I've always been very passionate about involvement in social causes and in public service. I have been an astrologer when it wasn't cool to be an astrologer. And so I always thought, like, well, I have to really tone down who I am. And the more I have been myself, been out when it didn't feel safe to be out, said I'm an astrologer and this is who I am and I'm going to post about it on social media. The more I have been courageous enough to be myself, the more fun I'm having, number one, and also the more lives I get to affect and help to be their authentic best selves too. So I think we all have these aspects of ourselves that can feel shameful or can feel like, oh, nobody will like me if they know this, or and I think authenticity is really the only way to go. Otherwise, we're living in our whole lives in half measures. And so I think the thing that surprised me is how I can be myself, and that when I am, that it's actually more that it inspires others to be themselves, and it just it makes the community stronger.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. The permission to be oneself, and to just accept oneself in the journey of life. And yeah, that's like, I feel like a big mission that a lot of us have to go through trials and tribulations to get to. And, and I kind of found, a lot of at least Western culture feels like there's such a desire for copy paste as opposed to true authenticity,
Right.
And so, yeah. So, what is your kind of call to action for our audience, for folks listening? What's your main takeaway? What do you want people to think about or do today after they listen to this conversation?
Yeah. I love your questions, Jasmine. This is so good. So I think, one thing that I'm going to borrow your Taurus moon, because because I think that right now we are really living, or your Taurus sun rather, not your Taurus moon. I'm going to borrow your Taurus sun. I think it's really easy to look at what's happening in the world and see the see the destruction.
Right.
And to feel that on such a deep, deep level. And beauty is really something that we can all draw toward, we can all, incorporate into our spiritual practices, into our daily lives to help to bring some balance. If we can't go out and we can't solve the problems of the world and we're doing all we can and we still feel like there's a lot happening right now, and astrologically there's a reason for that what we can do is we can connect to what is beautiful in our own lives. We connect to anything that inspires gratitude, even the small things. There's a rose bush that's just started to bloom outside of my window, and wow, oh my gosh, it's breathtaking. And so I think like my call to action would be draw to beauty and make beauty a spiritual practice as often as you can every day, to help you to really connect with what's beautiful about the earth and what's good about being in this physical experience.
That's so beautiful. Yes. Yes to beauty and Venusian or Venus themed life. I love that.
Yeah.
Amazing. And where can people find you, Rachel? Are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you?
Yes. So my website is rachellangastrologer.com. And you can also go to the rachellangshow.com or find me on anywhere you find podcasts. And I'm on Instagram and TikTok, both under Rachel Lang Astrologer.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Rachel. This was so lovely.
You. Yes, thank you so much. And I look forward to having you on my show and continuing our conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Amazing. Well, for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about astrology and magic with Rachel Lang, and you could tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Thanks again.